You know that feeling, that subtle, pervasive discomfort that lingers even when the room is quiet and the light is soft. It's not anxiety, not quite depression. It's the feeling of needing to apologize just for occupying space. You may have walked into a gathering, or perhaps just sat down at your own kitchen table and felt the persistent echo of a thought. If I were to simply vanish right now, the space would breathe a little easier. This moment of quiet collapse, where the silence isn't peace but the resonant proof of your perceived burden, is where we find the root of self-loathing. It is often spoken about as a single, explosive emotion, but for most of us, it is far subtler. It's an internal posture, a default setting that whispers, "I am a problem that must be managed." We're not talking about simple low self-esteem. That is an assessment of capability. We are talking about something deeper, a complete and systemic rejection of self, a belief that your core existence is fundamentally flawed. Most people who live with this feeling are high-functioning. They excel at work, they manage their relationships, they execute their roles flawlessly. But behind the performance, there is a profound emotional strategy at play. A strategy that allows you to survive in the world, but only by keeping joy, connection, and true self-acceptance at bay. The truth is, self-hatred is not a moral failing or a dramatic choice. It is a masterful, albeit destructive, defense mechanism built over time to prevent further injury. It stems from the core belief that I am a burden, or I am not worthy of anything good that lasts. If you look at the symptoms, the relentless self-criticism, the intentional rejection of pleasure, the pervasive sense of being an intrusion, you realize these aren't random behaviors. They are the deliberate and consistent execution of a strategy where you punish yourself preemptively, ensuring you never have to be shocked by rejection from the outside world. You take on the role of the chief prosecutor, the most relentless judge, because that is the one role where you still feel you have control. This brings us to the core emotional pain. The true tragedy is that we are not trying to avoid discomfort. We are trying to avoid the uncertainty of joy. When you grow up learning that good things are conditional or that happiness is always followed by a crash, the brain often makes a cold calculation. It is safer to remain in a state of controlled misery than to risk the blinding, destabilizing pain of true disappointment. Controlled misery, at least, is predictable. You know the script. You know the lines. You are the one holding the pen. And so, we build a complex inner world designed to keep genuine connection out and genuine happiness at bay. It is a slow, quiet process of elimination. The deliberate erasure of potential. We often call this self-loathing, but what it really is a profound state of emotional shutdown, a complex form of anhedonia that we impose upon ourselves. We are not simply lacking the will to be happy, we are systematically removing the capacity for it, brick by careful brick. This is the ground we walk on, the deliberate act of disconnecting from the parts of ourselves that feel too bright, too vulnerable, or too deserving. This journey requires quiet reflection, not loud instruction. We are here to name the pain you never had the language for. To truly understand this self-rejection, we must step inside the inner landscape it creates. Let's use the image of the Locked Conservatory. Imagine your mind, your true self, not as a chaotic battleground, but as a vast, beautiful conservatory, a large glass house built to nurture life. Inside, the soil is rich with potential, the air is warm, and the light is filtered perfectly. It holds the capacity for joy, creativity, and deep connection. It is where all the good things you ignore, your talents, your kindness, your successes, reside. Now, look closely at the windows. You, the owner, the architect of this space, have intentionally latched the doors and drawn heavy, opaque tarpaulins across the glass ceiling. The self-loathing individual does not forget to care for themselves. They refuse to. The refusal of self-care, neglecting sleep, poor diet, avoiding movement, never allowing yourself pleasure or rest, is not a sign of being too busy or lazy. It is a deliberate act of starvation. You look at the potential blooming inside the conservatory, and you make a cold, silent decree. Nothing in here is worthy of water, sunlight, or maintenance. This act of pleasure nullification is one of the most visible signs of self-hatred. It manifests in the denial of simple, restorative acts. It is the person who cannot sleep properly because their mind is a relentless internal seminar of their own failings. It is the individual who refuses to buy clothes that fit well or look nice because they look in the mirror and see a haggard reflection, and somehow they believe that image is precisely what they deserve. Why do we lock the conservatory? Because the self-critical mind believes that by denying joy, we are eliminating vulnerability. If the potential inside never blossoms, it can never be ripped out by someone else or destroyed by the environment. It is a grim form of control. You maintain perfect safety in a state of controlled, predictable decay. This metaphor powerfully captures the transition from low self-esteem to true self-rejection. Low self-esteem says, "I cannot tend this garden properly." Self-hatred says, "This garden should not exist, and I must ensure its slow, systematic decline." When compliments or praise arrive, they are treated like hostile foreign objects. Why? Because they threaten the integrity of the locked conservatory. They challenge the foundational decree that you are fundamentally unworthy. The self-loathing individual cannot simply accept a compliment, because doing so requires them to acknowledge the light they've been trying so hard to hide. Therefore, they instantly reject, deflect, or immediately find a counter-criticism to reinforce the protective darkness. You become the architect of scarcity, not just for others, but for yourself. You deprive yourself of anything remotely akin to delight, because deep down, the feeling of genuine happiness is experienced not as a gift, but as a loan that must be repaid with interest, and the interest is always shame. This inner isolation, this willful estrangement from your own core needs, is the quiet engine driving the perpetual loop of self-rejection. If self-hatred is a strategy, what is the brain's role in enforcing it? The mechanism is often not emotional, but chemical. Neuroscience helps us move beyond simple moral judgment and understand this as a profound adaptation. Studies focusing on reward processing in individuals with high self-criticism show a fascinating pattern. When we experience true joy, the mesolimbic pathway, often called the reward system, releases dopamine. This chemical is not just about pleasure, it's about motivation and learning the value of an experience. However, when genuine joy is consistently paired with an immediate surge of anxiety, fear of loss, or the internal voice of the inner critic tearing the moment down, the brain learns a powerful defensive lesson. Reward is unreliable and costly. When experiencing something good is immediately followed by a wave of cortisol, the stress hormone, because the inner critic immediately jumps in to say, "You don't deserve this," or "This is too good to last, prepare for the crash." The reward pathway becomes corrupted. To maintain equilibrium, the brain often enters a controlled, low dopamine state, which aligns perfectly with the behavioral patterns of anhedonia. We are not simply sad. The neural circuits responsible for anticipation and experience of pleasure have been subtly downregulated as a defensive measure. It's an internal safety fuse. If the highs are too terrifying, the system opts for the reliable, if miserable, neutral ground. Furthermore, the relentless self-criticism activates the amygdala, the brain's fear center. When the inner critic is active, the amygdala is subtly hypervigilant, continuously scanning the internal landscape for perceived threats, shortcomings, mistakes, potential rejection. This prolonged state of low-grade threat means the brain prioritizes safety over growth. This is key to understanding the refusal to dream big. The possibility of failure and the subsequent pain of rejection are not processed as learning opportunities. They are processed as an existential threat signaled by the hypervigilant amygdala. The safest path, then, is to smother aspirations, to refuse opportunities for growth, and to stay firmly within the confines of the established comfort zone. However miserable that zone might be, the self-loathing individual knows they are unhappy. But their brain has been trained to equate that unhappiness with a particular kind of safety. By perpetually keeping the reward system subdued and the fear center engaged, they successfully avoid the crushing, unpredictable pain of true external failure, replacing it with the predictable, manageable pain of internal self-flagellation. This is the neurochemical mechanism enforcing the locked conservatory. If the neuroscience explains how the circuit is shut down, depth psychology explains why we built that circuit in the first place. The self-loathing individual deals with two primary interlocking psychological mechanisms: rooted deeply in early relational patterns. The first is the internalized critic. According to attachment theory and cognitive psychology, the relentless internal critic is rarely our own original voice. It is the internalization of past relational figures, parents, caregivers, or significant authorities, whose love or acceptance felt conditional. When we internalize this voice, we take over the job of judging ourselves. This seems counterintuitive, but it serves a protective function. If I am the one controlling the criticism, I can regulate its intensity and timing. It is an attempt to create an illusion of autonomy over pain. You are attacking yourself first and hardest so that the actual or imagined judgment from the outside world loses its power. You become your own jailer, but you believe you are doing it for your own protection. This constant criticism manifests in the inability to forgive yourself. Everyone makes mistakes, but the self-loathing mind turns every error into evidence of fundamental character flaws. You are quick to blame yourself, even when objective circumstances prove otherwise. Why? Because the inner critic needs to feed. It needs evidence that the core belief, I am inadequate, is true. Commending yourself for a job well done starves the critic. Criticizing yourself for the tiniest error nourishes it. The second core mechanism is relational detachment, which springs from the sense of the burden of presence. Many individuals who hate themselves struggle immensely to maintain relationships, not because they are difficult, but because they genuinely believe their presence is an intrusion. They feel guilty for taking up space, time, or emotional energy from others. This stems from an early experience of feeling unwanted, or feeling that expressing authentic needs was met with rejection, annoyance, or withdrawal. The psyche adapts by deciding, it is safer to withdraw before I am forced to be rejected. Therefore, you isolate yourself. You may push people away subtly or overtly. When others show love or attention, you don't feel cherished, you feel burdened. Their love feels like a heavy responsibility that you are structurally incapable of reciprocating or deserving. The inability to truly accept love from others is a direct consequence of the inability to love the self. You cannot let them see the Locked Conservatory because you are convinced that if they saw the decay inside, they would validate your own worst fear and leave. This is the psychological paradox. The self-loathing person craves connection more than anyone, yet their core defense mechanism is to ensure that connection remains permanently superficial or completely inaccessible. We have identified the mechanisms, the inner critic, and relational detachment. But now we must ask the pivotal question, the one most people are afraid to phrase. Why do we cling to this pain? The core insight, the difficult truth that sits beneath the surface of self-hatred is this. You do not fear the pain of self-contempt. You fear the uncertainty of joy. Self-hatred, for all its misery, offers one profound, if perverse, comfort: predictability. It is a closed system. It tells you exactly who you are, a failure, a burden, and exactly what to expect, more disappointment. When you are the one orchestrating the pain, when you are the architect of scarcity, you are never truly surprised. The emotional collapse, when it comes, is an expected event, a validation of your initial premise. This is fundamentally about control. In moments of deep vulnerability or past trauma, you may have experienced unpredictable suffering, pain inflicted by others, pain that made no sense. Your self-hatred is a desperate, unconscious attempt to master that experience by recreating pain on your own terms. When something genuinely good happens, a success, a compliment, a moment of real love, it creates immediate chaos in the controlled system. It challenges the foundations of your safe identity as an unworthy person. The internal alarms blare. Happiness feels dangerous because it implies two terrifying possibilities. You might lose it. The ultimate vulnerability. You might deserve it. Which means everything you built your safe misery on is a lie. So, the self-loathing acts as a powerful deterrent against hope. It is a subtle form of self-sabotage, but its purpose is preservation. You smother your hopes, refusing to leave your emotional comfort zone, because the possibility of failure and rejection is terrifying. The moment you encounter a setback, you instantly feel worthless, because that feeling reinforces the familiar, predictable narrative. Think of it like wearing a weighted vest. The vest is heavy, It makes every movement difficult, and it slows you down. But you believe you need it. You believe that if you took it off, if you suddenly became light, free, and capable, you would immediately fly up and be destroyed by the forces above. The weight, the shame, the contempt, they are perceived as the only thing keeping you grounded and safe from a more catastrophic descent. This is the psychological tax we pay for perceived safety. You deny yourself opportunities to grow and gain new experiences because your internal security system has flagged belief in self as a high-risk liability. You refuse to let yourself succeed because success would mean dismantling the carefully constructed wall of self-hatred that has protected you all these years. The systematic nature of self-hatred inevitably leads to a deep split between the inner self and the outer world. This is the realm of identity estrangement, where you feel fundamentally disconnected and alienated from who you truly are. The most common behavioral symptom of this estrangement is the creation and maintenance of a facade. You become one person when you are alone, tired, burdened, self-critical, and an entirely different person when you are around others, charming, capable, agreeable, and perfectly adjusted. You wear a mask not to deceive others, but because you genuinely believe the real you is incapable of being accepted, or even tolerated. This is a profound form of emotional labor. You spend immense energy trying to fit in and be liked, constantly wishing you were someone else, because the original self has been flagged as toxic by your own internal security system. The facade isn't just a collection of pleasant behaviors. It's a meticulously crafted defensive structure. It prevents intimacy. If you are always pretending, no one can truly see you, and therefore, no one can truly harm you by rejecting you. The tragedy here lies in the compounding loneliness. The more successful your facade is, the more people like the persona, the deeper the internal isolation grows. You feel unseen even when surrounded by adoration. Because the adoration is directed at a character you invented, not at the weary individual behind the performance. This brings us back to self-sabotage, but seen through the lens of identity. When you have ambition or dream something big, the fear isn't just failing the task, it's failing the test of identity. If you chase a dream and fall short, it doesn't just hurt. It reinforces the belief that the true self is fatally flawed. Therefore, the self-loathing individual subconsciously chooses to create an early exit. You might delay submitting the application, miss the deadline, or underperform just enough to ensure the outcome is a safe, controlled no. This is not laziness. This is the architect of scarcity protecting the fragile, estranged self from the shock of external validation or rejection. You deny yourself opportunities and meaningful experiences, not because you lack capability, but because your deeply ingrained insecurities make it hard for you to see your capabilities clearly. You hold yourself back because the moment you allow yourself to genuinely succeed, the facade may crumble, and you would be forced to confront the true, vulnerable, and potentially deserving self you've worked so hard to keep locked away. This systematic erosion of identity is the final, most devastating toll of self-hatred. If self-hatred is a sophisticated defense system, then the path toward healing is not about dismantling the entire structure at once. It's about gently lowering the drawbridge. We must recognize that we cannot force ourselves to suddenly love ourselves. That is too abstract, too demanding, and often triggers a backlash from the inner critic. The path forward is one of observation, neutralization, and micro-affirmation. 1. Neutralizing the inner critic, the observer's stance. The first and most critical step is to separate the voice from the self. The inner critic operates effectively because we accept its pronouncements as objective truth. The key is to introduce a distance. When the voice erupts, "You messed up that presentation, you are completely worthless," do not argue with it. Arguing reinforces its power. Instead, observe it as an externalized figure. Give it a name, perhaps the Warden or the prosecutor. When the Warden speaks, simply note, the Warden is active. I hear the statement that I am worthless. I recognize this voice as a recording, not a reflection of my current reality. According to cognitive science, this process, called cognitive defusion, diminishes the emotional charge of the thought. You are shifting from being the thought to having the thought. This act of observation is the first true challenge to the established control of self-contempt. It doesn't silence the voice, but it takes away its steering wheel. 2. Redefining self-care as defiance. We must redefine self-care from a luxury to an act of defiance against the inner critic. For the self-loathing individual, self-care is often the hardest thing to allow. True self-care is not about pampering. It is about meeting foundational needs as a statement of inherent worth. Sleep. Going to bed on time is not laziness. It is an act of respect for your nervous system. Recognizing that your physical well-being is essential. Nourishment. Eating a nutritious meal is a quiet, powerful declaration. This body deserves energy, regardless of what the Warden says. Movement. Engaging in gentle physical activity is not about achieving a look. It is about releasing the trapped emotional energy that the amygdala has stored as chronic tension. These are not grand gestures. They are micro-affirmations, small, verifiable acts that contradict the core programming of scarcity and worthlessness. Each act is a tiny moment where you unlock a door in the conservatory just long enough to let a little light in, challenging the architect of scarcity. 3. The gentle art of receiving. Because self-hatred involves relational detachment, healing requires practicing the gentle art of receiving. Start small. When someone offers a genuine compliment, do not deflect immediately. Instead of arguing, practice the script. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. This is an exercise in tolerance. It is not about agreeing with the compliment. It is about tolerating the discomfort of being seen and tolerating the possibility that you might be wrong about your worthlessness. By simply saying thank you, you allow the positive external feedback to exist without immediately internalizing the protective shame loop. It is a vital step in reversing the burden of presence by allowing your space to be shared without apology. This shifts the focus from avoiding pain to tolerating vulnerability. This is not a quick fix. It is a slow, quiet process of redirecting energy away from internal war and towards self-attunement. This process, as studies in trauma recovery show, builds neuroplasticity, slowly rewiring the reward system to associate safety not with misery, but with self-respect. The journey out of the Locked Conservatory is not marked by a sudden, dramatic breakthrough, but by the accumulation of those small, defiant acts. We began by observing that self-hatred is a form of self-protection, a desperate attempt to control pain by orchestrating our own scarcity. You have spent years believing that the weighted vest of self-contempt was necessary to keep you grounded. The fear of releasing that weight, the fear of soaring and then crashing, is perhaps the single greatest barrier to recovery. But what if the weight itself is what is exhausting you, not the threat of the external world? The truth revealed by this psychological journey is that your deepest pain is not the hatred you feel, but the loneliness of living a life that is not your own. You have lived behind the facade, constantly managing the perceived burden of presence, sacrificing your true self to maintain the predictable misery that your nervous system falsely equates with safety. The crucial shift is moving from self-judgment to self-curiosity. When the inner critic demands a reason for your worthlessness, offer curiosity instead of compliance. Ask, where did this belief originate? What old pain is this new criticism trying to protect me from? Stop demanding perfection before you allow yourself to rest. Rest, as we have discussed, is not a reward for performance. It is a fundamental human requirement. By allowing yourself to truly rest, you are quietly affirming your intrinsic worth, regardless of the day's accomplishments. This is a subtle act of resistance against the high-functioning detachment that demands constant output. Recognize the difference between healing and fixing. Healing is about integration, bringing the estranged parts of yourself, the ambitious self, the vulnerable self, the tired self, back into the main house. Fixing is about trying to eliminate flaws, which only feeds the inner critic. The goal is not to eliminate your flaws, but to realize that even your flaws are not nearly as dangerous as your continued rejection of them. The slow work of integration means learning to tolerate the discomfort of being seen. The next time someone offers you connection, or praise, or even just space, practice letting the fear pass through you without immediately deploying the defense mechanism. Let the positive experience exist in the room for a few extra seconds before you feel compelled to reject it. The path forward is defined by quiet consistency, not by grand emotional revelations. It is the slow, deliberate work of removing the tarpaulins from the windows of the Locked Conservatory, one small section at a time. The goal is simply to allow us a small shaft of light to fall upon the soil within, recognizing that life, even in its fragile state, is still possible. This is Evan Reed. Thank you for allowing me to accompany you on this quiet act of observation.